So good morning. I am Dante Kling-Ang, Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times. Welcome to today's sort of town hall meeting with business leaders of the Philippines. Today we've gathered some of our partners to get the pulse of the business community. I'd like to thank them all, and before we start, I'd like to introduce them to you. First, we have Mr. Michael Arcotaming Guarin, President of the Financial Executive Institute of the Philippines, or FINEX. Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Sir, Attorney Alfredo Pascual, the President of the Management Association of the Philippines, MAP. Good morning.
Morning.
The President of the Davao City Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Maria Lourdes Monteverde, the Honorary Consul also of Mexico. Good morning, Doctora.
Morning from Davao.
Also, good morning to President Charles Kenneth Ko, the President of the Cebu Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good morning, Mr. Ko.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning also to Executive Director Jasper Svenningsson of the Nordic Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I've been practicing.
You did. Thank you. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning to, buongiorno to Managing Director Lawrence Ziller of the Italian Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines. Morning, sir.
Buongiorno, everyone.
Okay. And of course, good morning to the Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Chris Nelson. Morning, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Greetings from Bacolod today.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we are hearing from across the country today. So, well, as you know, the elections is less than 3 weeks away. As I briefed you earlier, we're not here to ask you for your preferences, but mainly to get the sentiments of the business community. Maybe the thing we'd like to ask first is that with the new government expected to be elected soon, of course, taking over by mid-year, what do you think should be the important policies that the next government should pay attention to? Whoever is elected, whether he or she, what do you think should be the first priority on the economic or business front of the next president?
Do you want us to answer in order, or how would you do it, Dante?
Well, since you're asked, go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Okay.
It seems like you're ready to go. All right, let's start with you.
Well, like my Prime Minister, who's obviously very active in parties, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so look, I think from the British Chamber point of view, and I think that will maybe covered across Europe, and we'd like to see a continuing opening of the economy. So in that context, obviously, there's been a lot of activity in terms of reforms. And with the recent passage, obviously, of the Public Service Act, the Foreign Investment Act, and the Retail Trade Liberalization Act. And this is, I think, has gone a long way. Of course, it's very notable, obviously, the legislation is being cleared, obviously, just prior to the conclusion of this administration, which is the 30th of June. We'd like to see that continuing. And I think the message we'd like to convey, of course, is that the Philippines, which we promote, and I'm sure all the rest of the chambers are doing extensively as well, we're competing with others in Southeast Asia.
Right.
So it's critically important that the Philippines remains competitive. It looks what developments are going on in other countries in Southeast Asia. And the final thing we'd like to see, and hopefully ratified even when Congress resumes, is RCEP, which is the overall trade agreement. This is a very important agreement, and I think it will keep the Philippines competitive and a key member. And obviously a delay in that ratification is just it doesn't help in terms of competitiveness. So that's the key point. And I think those measures will lead to further foreign direct investment and, of course, will help to obviously boost the economy and alleviate poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I see Mike here wanting to jump in, of Mike Guarin of FINEX. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. So thank you. So consistent with what has been shared, part of the priorities by FINEX and as well as my clients while I do my day job would be hopefully still on the continuity theme. Continuity as it relates to economic recovery. Definitely 2021 was better off compared to 2020. And we don't want to see a blip just because there is a change in leadership. So from a macro perspective, that would be one, and as well as continued job generation. Let's not be fooled by the continued opening of the economy, but there's still a lot of room to recover into, which we were badly hit, during the 2020 pandemic. So something more specific would be, again, consistent with the fact that we are competing with the rest of the Asian countries, would be on infrastructure. One good thing that happened during the past 6 years is that the infrastructure spending relative to GDP has increased from around 4% of GDP to around 6.7% of total GDP as of the latest measurement. Again, just because there will be a change in administration, we don't want that to dip in 2022. Hopefully, it will continue to grow. So,
all right. Well, let's hear from President Duterte's home base in Davao, from Dr. Lily Monteverde. So I think we're hearing something common from the British Chamber and from Phoenix. What are your sentiments from Davao's perspective?
I'll be talking about Davao and Mindanao as a whole because most of the directions are really on the national level already. So for us here in Davao and Mindanao, we would really want that all the projects will be pushed through. There will be nothing that will be left behind, especially for infrastructure development, and that for the social and health initiatives that the present administration has already started for Mindanao. Also, very important is security. So the things that they have been doing regarding the BARM, the peace agreements, please continue to do that. It doesn't mean that when there's a change of administration, things needs to be changed. If there is a good one that was started by the previous administration, it should be continued. Continuity is a must for good policies and reforms that have been instituted already. So for us here in Davao and Mindanao, we don't want to be left behind in the global competitiveness, and being the food basket for the whole Philippines. I think it's very critical also that the agricultural sector for food security is a must for the development and infra support from the national government. So please continue what is good that is being done. Don't stop. And for us, Mindanao, we have been left for so long. So I think this is high time also that we need to continue what is has been done by the previous administration. So that's it.
All right. Well, let's ask the Nordic Chamber, Jesper. What are your views?
No, I somehow echo the sentiment from my colleagues here that a 6-year administration and the uncertainty that follows whenever there's a change is somewhat critical, I think, for the Philippines to fulfill the real potential. If I was to say some kind of wish list for the next administration, it's of course also to further improve the infrastructure, especially the digital one. And that means speeding up digitalization of governmental processes for more transparency and less red tape. I think that is really needed to further improve the business environment, both domestically and international. And then I think it's really important to get inspired from abroad on best practices on enabling a world-class business environment. And that could include the long-term critical areas like education and sustainability. I would say I just returned, as I mentioned before, I just returned from Singapore yesterday, and they can certainly be used for inspiration. I think the Nordic countries, which I'm representing with the Nordic Chamber, I mean, we are in the top of the world in sustainability, and we are more than happy to share whatever we can with the current and the future administrations.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Ko, Jasper talked about the infrastructure, particularly IT. I know you guys were pretty badly hit by and when we I think first met, you were still trying to get your phone lines back working. What's the view from the Cebu Chamber? What would you like to see from the next government?
Well, in Cebu, we would like to see exports being and manufacturing being emphasized again, because we're very import dependent country, so it's good to hear from the foreign chambers that they are interested in making more foreign direct investments. So but in this regard, what we've noticed is we have example industries like shipbuilding that's very big in Cebu, and even now they're run out of workers because no even they have a school. So if there's any whatever direction in foreign direct investments, we need our labor force needs to be prepared when these investments come in, so that there's enough workforce with qualified skills. So in that regard, we're hoping the government and private sector can work together in putting up training centers so that everyone can be benefited when the FDIs comes in. And another speaking about competitiveness, I guess our national government needs to also look at. I think during the last administration and the previous one, we've done. There's been a lot of improvements done with ports, but still, like I think our shipping costs is still, or moving logistics is still relatively higher.
Quite expensive, yeah.
So, and also power. No, I think it's also because we're in an archipelago, but I guess that's also an area where that can have a ripple effect and improve our competitiveness if we can bring that cost down. Then lastly, for Cebu, our wish list would be also to like infrastructure would be to improve our to push through on the mass transit, because if you come to visit Cebu, the traffic for a small island is quite bad. And hopefully we can continue on there's ongoing works with the diversion road, similar to what's being done in Cagayan in Mindanao. So hopefully that can also be finished within the next few years. That would be a great help in also reducing the cost of transport. That's all.
Okay. Well, President Fred Pascual, Mr. Ko talked about traffic. We're very familiar with that here in Manila. Sir, you're on mute. I put everyone on mute.
I would like to first talk about an important first step that the president must do. The new president must appoint a highly professional and experienced economic team led by a finance secretary who not only has the necessary expertise, but also has the president's ear and can get the president to go for the team's way. We've seen that in the current government. The incumbent finance secretary is fortunate to have a president who would actively support his team's recommendations. So very critical. The new president must also appoint technocrats in the following priority departments, which have been mentioned earlier by some of the speakers. Education, because we need to produce capable and well-trained workforce. Health, they should be able to do the work, and healthy to be able to not be a burden to society. Agriculture, I can talk some more about this later on. Public works, talk about issue of mobility, transportation. It's a big issue, particularly in Metro Manila. Finance, of course, and economic planning. But at the same time, a justice department and ombudsman who will go after the corrupt and the corruptors, the big guys, and a police chief who will catch them when required. The new president will have to assume the responsibility of implementing the recent important reforms enacted in the current government and the previous administrations. All these reforms that he will inherit will fall into the lap of the next president. It is likely that opponents will lobby to reverse them. The next president, therefore, must be fortified with good leadership qualities to overcome such challenges. Well,
thank you.
I can talk about the sectoral reforms that we would like to espouse at the right time.
Okay. All right. Well, let's hear first from Lawrence Ziller from the Italian Chamber. Good morning, sir. Give us,
Dante.
do you have a preference on what you'd like the next government to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, I think the next government should definitely continue the path of building more infrastructure. So continuing the build agenda of the present government. And that will also mean additional jobs. That will mean that the country just will become more competitive. That also gives the foreign chambers and foreign investors an opportunity, especially through PPP projects, to come in and invest and help the Philippines to build, not only the Philippines in general, but single LGUs, for example, to build their local infrastructures. I think that is very important that this happens, because if we just look at, for example, we heard about power earlier, waste to energy. Now, waste to energy, there is still a few bottlenecks left, but the Philippines has a waste problem and doesn't know where to put the waste. We cannot put it just in the earth. And so with the waste to energy program and with the PPPs, we can, or the foreign investors can really help the Philippines to increase the energy production, which, by the way, by 2040, the energy need will double in the Philippines. So renewable energies should be priority for the new government. And then for the build, I would love to see an amendment of the Right-of-Way Act, because without a proper Right-of-Way Act, very few things can be done. So if a road has to be built, a road has to be built, no matter what. And so that should really be implemented finally. And the last thing, we have seen recently a great piece of legislation, which is the Innovative Startup Act. And this Innovative Startup Act has been, I think it's from 2019, but until today, we're still missing the guidelines from the ICT, DOST, and DTI. So it is unimplementable at the moment. And this would also be a great opportunity for foreign investors from small to big to come in and start a new Google, a new Microsoft, a new Tesla from the Philippines. So that is, let's say, in general, the few things I would recommend.
Well, like Mr. Pascual, I'm sure you have a
may I add something on the PPP?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, as we all know, our fiscal situation is not so good. The fiscal space is not as much as before the pandemic. So PPP becomes an important way of continuing the build program without putting further strain on the finances of the government. There is now a move to amend the BOT law implementing rules and regulation. I think we need to make sure that any amendments introduced to the IRR will not result in making the country less attractive. For example, I noted that one provision is that the decision of a regulatory agency cannot be subject of an arbitration case. And normally, arbitration is sought precisely because of actions by regulatory agencies. And also the process of approving unsolicited proposals where innovation of the private sector could really be seen should not be very strenuous process. I think there are layers and layers of approvals, and the need for streamlining is very important. So that's my take on PPP. I agree. PPP should be promoted given the fiscal constraints of the country and the need to continue with build.
Right. But Jasper, go ahead. Go ahead. You're going to say something else?
Yes, if I may. So
Mike, go ahead. Yes, please.
Just to support what President Fred just mentioned, my day job is likewise helping foreign investors enter into infrastructure projects. So part of those would be negotiating the concession agreement, right? So I've seen it firsthand wherein a potential Australian or even a European investor would refuse to enter into that infrastructure project because it runs counter to what they're used to. So hopefully, whatever there is already an existing draft exposure, no, of the marked up IRR for the regarding the BOT law. Let's hopefully the new government will take into account how foreign investors would look or feel about those new changes, because they will not just blindly sign, right, on any concession agreements or contracts here when there's a long list of other countries that they could easily invest in. So let's be very careful on the changes. Obviously, we're conscious that government is trying to protect itself, but there has to be a clear cost-benefit analysis being done by the legislators when it comes to making changes to IRR provisions.
Yeah, I was.
Can I make a point?
Yes, so go ahead. You were actually, I was going to call on you because you were making a point earlier that we need to be more competitive, and you mentioned the Public Service Act, and anyway, go ahead.
No, I'd like to echo that point, and I think also, I guess, related to that is a few things. The first is as we all know, every act has to have an implementing rules and regulations.
Right.
To our knowledge, that's already been done, but for the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, I think we're still waiting for the other two. And obviously that's important because we know from past experience, sometimes it can take 3 to 4 years for implementing rules. And I think there is a degree of impetus. And echoing the other point just now, and that is I want to kind of emphasize our role as well. Our role is to promote to UK companies and investors these changes. And that's what we're doing. And at the same time, competitiveness. Competitiveness is a moving target. And we have to constantly look at what other countries are doing as well. And at the same time, look at how they're promoting actively back in the UK or in European countries or wherever. So I think it's a great move, but it's only a great move if we can promote it well and if those implementing rules align with those acts and that we can get companies to come. So great move, but we need to keep the momentum and the impetus going. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris. And I was going to, ask you, you mentioned that, we're competing with others. Are you, who do you perceive to be the biggest challenger now in ASEAN to the Philippines? I'm sure, as you said, other countries are also pitching to British investors. I'm sure you've heard, some of their pitches, right?
I would say Vietnam,
okay.
Particularly. I think Indonesia, Vietnam. If I look at what goes on in terms of activities back in the UK, you see lots of delegations from those countries. You see them being active,
right?
And we have to be similar. And the final thing I want to say, actually, and one of the roles we've tried to achieve in partnership with the UK government is to say, look, the Philippines is a great market. There's a lot of talented people, 110 million. It's great opportunities in different sectors, but also make it your gateway to Southeast Asia.
Okay.
So to do that, you have to have that backup. And, I do want to say it's good to see the opening up of the economy, but we need to keep that going and on in through into the next administration.
Okay. Lawrence, from your perspective, I'm sure you've been hearing what other ASEAN countries are doing to attract Italian businesses to the Philippines. What do you think could be done on our part to make us more competitive? You're on mute, by the way, Lawrence. I need to.
Okay, thank you, Dante. Well, I believe in the saying that money is like water, and it flows in the direction of the least resistance.
Okay.
So if we remove some of the existing resistance to foreign investment, I think everything will just flow better and easier. I agree with Chris that the biggest challengers here in the region are Vietnam and now Indonesia, who is coming back very strong. But the Philippines, with the help of technology, and that I mean foreign technology, you bring in foreign investments, that means you're bringing in also foreign technology. And through that, the Philippines can really establish itself as it was called the Asian tiger. Mm-hmm. Definitely that would give them a competitive advantage, but there is a long way to go. And with the hurdles that we have seen or heard about before, if we all work together, and also with the new administration, I think we can achieve some great results. And we are doing the same. The Italian Chamber is promoting the new laws or pieces of legislation, but we are just a little bit impatient to see the guidelines, IRRs, and the implementation of these regulations and new laws.
Well, I mean this in a funny way, but if the Italians are frustrated, there must be something really wrong. Because Jesper, I'll get to you, Mike, in a minute, but Jesper, I see you nodding there, but maybe to just hear completely from the foreign chambers. You want to jump in?
Yes, please. I mean, if Lawrence is impatient, imagine what we are in the Nordics. We are we are used to everything being super streamlined, right? We have the most digitalized governments and processes.
You're not used to waiting, yeah.
But I would say, I mean, we are already involved in several projects. The Cebu Bridge that's being finished, well, any of these days now. That's with help from Denmark. For instance, there's a lot of projects going on, and we just hope that will continue. And as I can only echo my colleagues from the European chambers, right, Chris and Lawrence, having it properly implemented, and let's see exactly what it means, and let's start acting on it, right? We are already promoting it, and we just want, more clarity, really to be certain what it is we are promoting. And then I'm sure a lot of companies will jump on it. Just last week, I had meetings with several companies, Nordic companies in Singapore. They have their regional headquarters there, because it's a bit easier to do business, but many of them, they are really eager to come to the Philippines and help the Philippines to improve.
Well, that's good to hear. Mike, you had your hand up earlier. I skipped you there a little while ago. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. And then I just wanted to support. I agree that among the ASEAN first, definitely Vietnam it continues to be on the rise. So early on during the pandemic, around mid-2020, there was actually an effort to talk to a lot of foreign manufacturers based in China, to talk to them, to try to convince them, would the Philippines be a good alternative for them? And it was close to a zero success rate for us. And a lot of them decided to move to Vietnam. So I think strategically, the Philippines is missing out on landing, these global manufacturers and making them choose the Philippines. Some of the feedback we've received is that infrastructure is so much way ahead in Vietnam compared to us, especially the port, wherein primarily they use shipping ports as basis for the exchange of goods. And there is that perception, rightly or incorrectly, that policies, they're more stable in Vietnam. So whatever political or legal basis they used to invest in Vietnam, let's say in 2020 or 2021, they're more confident that 5 years, 10 years into the future, it would be the same policy. Therefore, there's less volatility in their investment decisions.
Yeah, well, they've had the same party in power since '74. But let me go to Dr. Monteverde. I know the Davao Chamber has been working also with your counterparts in Indonesia. It's been mentioned here earlier that it's emerging as one of the prime competitors along with Vietnam. Maybe if you can weigh in, what do you see happening in Indonesia that you'd like to see also happen here in the Philippines in terms of attracting businesses?
We have been doing a lot from the chamber side of exchanges of trade relationship with Indonesia, particularly for Bitong and Manado. Actually, it was the
Yes.
Davao City Chamber who started off the ASEAN Roro, which was inaugurated by then Indonesian President Widodo and President Duterte here at Kudos Port. But the main problem really is, like what was mentioned, is port. The support for that. And aside from that also is the volume of the cargo that needs to be exchanged for both countries, because we have similarities also. But if we pool our resources well, I think we have a good chance for international trade. And likewise, for the northern Sulawesi part of Indonesia, the goods that comes into that area goes through Jakarta. And it takes a longer time for the logistics and their support. So that's what we are addressing for the Indonesia side, that they go via Davao and via General Santos City. However, we need to redo everything for the ASEAN Roro and maybe just do it with a simple, shipping line so that it will be more competitive and sustainable in the long run. But really, Indonesia and the Philippines have a lot of similarities and we can work together. We have a very, very close border, especially on that part of Jose Abad Santos or Davao Occidental. So we're looking forward to more trade exchanges between Indonesia and the Philippines via this route.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ko, you mentioned something earlier about the cost of logistics, and one of the editorials we've written about in the past is that cabotage law was passed in 2016, and yet, as you said just now, it's still very costly to ship things from Cebu to the rest of the country, more so than it would be to probably send goods from Cebu to a foreign country or foreign market. You mentioned also that the shipping industry needs some assistance. Maybe you can give some viewpoints here.
I think recently the Philippine government has opened it up to foreign competition. So I guess when it comes to being competitive, it's also being about having competitors. Because as you know, there's just very few shipping companies that are based domestically. So I think some big international players are coming in. But aside, it's not just shipping. That's freight. It's not just the freight cost that's expensive. It's also the trucking and the arrastre. Because part of that is partly monopolistic in some ways. Because that's also it's controlled by the PTA and some groups also. Even that has to be opened up.
Right. So it's the whole value chain. Dr. Rosal, you had your hand up earlier. I'm sorry, I missed calling on you. Did you want to say something? I think they were talking about competitiveness of the Philippines, or relative to Vietnam, Indonesia, and others.
Are you referring to me, Kling?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to say that while innovation could be a basis for being competitive, in the real world, there is such a thing as replicating what has already proved to be successful. So there is no shame in finding out what are the success factors contributing to Vietnam's, rapid growth and its attractiveness to foreign investors. Same with Indonesia, and we should not be hesitant to copy, tested and working approaches. Now, in order to speed up projects, the problem normally is in getting all sorts of permits at various levels of government and acquiring, as mentioned earlier, the road right of way if it's a road project or the site of a particular factory. In PPP arrangements in other countries, what has been done to speed this up is that the government does the acquiring of the land, already create a project company, and then when the project is bid out, they bid out the project company together with all the permits and all the road right of way or factory or port sites needed for the project. And that's a way to speed up a PPP project.
Well, you mentioned the difficulties in doing business, and one of those, as you gave an example to, the ease of doing business law was passed during this administration. What do you think is needed to cut red tape further and make it more business friendly? Mr. Pascual?
I think the key to the solution is really digital transformation.
Okay.
We need to move fully to have e-government all throughout the bureaucracy. It will not only make the processes efficient, but it will also make transactions transparent and less susceptible to corrupt practices.
All right. Well, Chris, you are agreeing there.
All over the place, this digital transformation.
Yeah, Chris, you were.
I just like to. Yes, and unfortunately, so first of all, I'd like to say I totally echo what Fred just said. I think the ease of doing business was one of the number one questions raised by many of the SMEs and MSMEs who tried to come to the Philippines. And I think we have to use the digitalization. We have to get some practical examples, right? And again, I like we have to be very clear. I mean, Jasper has been in Singapore. I mean, the standard is in Singapore, you can set a company up in 24 hours.
Right.
I mean, that's...
Chris, it's in a matter of an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't want you to say that, but I was hoping we were trying to make 24 hours, but it's 1 hour. I mean, the point of issue is it's those are the kind of standards we have to look at, right? And maybe we don't get to an hour, but maybe we're not at 24 days. We try to get to a much closer point, and I totally echo. And of course, the pandemic has led to a lot more digitalization, and that has to be followed through, right? And I think in terms of wanting to promote the ease of doing business, we have to be very clear and have some very practical examples, which we can then push through with our companies to get more people here. And look, 1 hour is a great standard. We won't get there. I just want to finish because unfortunately I have to go and leave you all, but I'd just like to say I'd like to thank Dante and the Manila Times for this initiative. And I wish all my colleagues, thank you for all your work. I think we've made some great efforts, particularly on all the legislation. I think that was a great combined effort. So I'd just like to compliment everybody on the teamwork. Thank you all very much.
All right,
on
thanks,
behalf
Chris.
of the British Chamber. Thank you.
All right, I look forward to working with you again.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Jasper, you want to jump in because Chris mentioned your recent trip to Singapore, and boy, 1 hour. I think a lot of Filipinos will be happy with a week.
I mean, this was a simple company. I set it up myself. Okay, applied for everything online, and after I applied, less than an hour later, I had the legal permit, the documentation saying now I can do business. Yeah, that's myself. It's not a fake, thinking example. That's how it was. Mm-hmm. The same goes. I'm a permanent resident in Singapore.
Okay.
Renewing it could be done from the Philippines.
Wow.
Online. That's how simple things works there. I would say in Denmark, where I'm originally from, I bought a house earlier last year from the Philippines. I signed the deed here. I got the deed. It's all digitalized.
Right.
It takes 0 minutes even.
Yeah.
It's done automatically.
Yeah, Mr. Pascual said, digitization. I mean, of course, we can't do everything at once. If the Nordic Chamber would have a preference, where should it begin? What aspect of government services should be digitized, in your opinion?
I think many of the constraints are at the local LGU level, particularly for setting up MSME type of businesses. And there are LGUs that have succeeded in digitalizing their processes, like Makati, for instance. I don't know. It's a matter of just DILG, adopting that model and getting it done in all the other LGUs. I don't know why it cannot be done by our leaders. But that's the way to do. I mean, it doesn't have to be, as I said, innovation has its rewards, but not each and every LGU will have to innovate, for its own digital transformation. There are models that can be fully rolled out very quickly. And that should be how DILG should do it, with the support of DICT. But mentioning DICT, I'd like to point out also that we're lagging behind in strengthening our broadband backbone across the country, which we need for many things, not just setting up businesses, but also in running businesses, in finding out what's happening in the market for farmers in remote areas. They need to know how the prices of their outputs are doing. And education, we need to be able to reach to remote areas, to bring good lessons to children in the provincial areas, because we are lacking in competent teachers. And we need to make use of digital technology to replicate our excellent teachers in some schools and we need a good broadband backbone for that. There are many plans I have seen about this. Implementation is key, and that's the challenge, a major challenge to the incoming government, to implement all these plans, roadmaps. There is a recent roadmap, for example, done by the scientists in the country. This is the Pagtanaw 2050. It envisions the Philippines being developed as archipelagic maritime country, making full use of its natural endowment, the sea waters around the islands. I think the sea waters constitute more than 20 times the area of our land mass in the Philippines. So a lot of potential. Implementation is the key. That's why, as I said earlier, getting the team that will run the government is critical. We need technocrats. We need leaders who can get things done.
Jasper, I think let's finish. Where should we implement first?
Oh, that's a hard question to ask. I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that, for instance, the Danish government has recently concluded a 2-year mapping in Brazil on the Brazilian government's digital processes, and trying to find, all the best projects to implement. And they're actually keen to do something similar here in the Philippines. So that could be one way. I think it's important to map it. Every country is individual, has individual requirements. So that's important that it's customized, the solution to each country. I do agree with Mr. Pascual that there is certainly some LGUs that do things different than the best LGUs, and that could be an area to start with. But I'm no expert. I cannot really say, but I do know that there's resources available that would like to help.
Okay. Lawrence, maybe you want to talk about Italy, because I think I feel that, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that, Filipinos are very similar to Italians, but maybe you can give us some best practices that maybe we can learn from your country.
Yes, absolutely. Filipinos are very similar to Italians. So there is actually a historic reason for that. I have to remind you that when they say that the Spanish came here to conquer the Philippines, half of Italy was actually under the Spanish flag. That was the reign of the two Sicilies. That went on, I think, for a couple of 100 years. So many of those who actually came to the Philippines during that time were from southern Italy. And so they brought not only their culture, their way of thinking, but also their food. So that may explain why Filipinos love spaghetti. Then we can debate where the spaghetti are coming from. That's another story. But we have to actually give credit also to the Philippines. I mean, when I was in Italy last time, that was now in 2018, I was looking for a taxi, and there was no Grab taxi, and I had to find a phone. Where's the taxi phone number? And then I was just outraged that I could not just call a taxi from where I am. I had to spend 20 minutes looking for a number and then calling a number and then getting a taxi. So in certain sectors, the Philippines is actually more advanced than some of the Western countries. That's, for example, in transportation. Maybe that came along by solving a problem. And so, for example, in Italy, you don't have a wallet like, for example, coins.ph or Gcash. You have to go via other banking apps. And so that is, for example, a great plus. So the digitalization of certain sectors can actually give a competitive advantage to the Philippines. Now, following this trend is the challenge, because the weakness I feel here in the Philippines is always implementation. Now, there is rules, there is laws, but what is missing? The implementation. That starts with the traffic. You do not see the traffic wardens to implement the rules, and that's why you have crazy driving at times. And it goes up to the government level, where laws are not implemented because this is missing, that is missing, and there is always something missing. Or there is always a little clause in the guidelines, a little rule implemented just to safeguard a few, to say, oh yeah, I'm protecting this, I'm protecting the Filipinos, I'm protecting. And so we are never getting to the bottom of actually fully implementing all the good things that have been done.
All right. Dr. Monteverde, Davao has seen a lot of development, I think faster than what other cities in Mindanao have seen, and probably faster than many other local governments across the country have seen. What's happening in Davao that you think could be looked at to scale across the Philippines, so that as Mr. Pascual said, things could be implemented better. And Lawrence was saying we have a lot of good laws, but the implementation is where we hit the snag. But what's been being done in Davao?
At the moment, in Davao, we have many of the infrastructure projects, especially on the build. And we have the Davao Bypass Road, the Davao Coastal, the interlinkages between Samal and that of Davao City. And then, of course, we have the upcoming Mindanao Railway transport system and the high priority bus systems. These are all geared towards connectivity between cities. And of course, one of the most defining, I think, for the whole region is the upcoming implementation of that Metropolitan Davao as one region. So with these things that are upcoming, we see that Metro Davao as a whole will be more competitive in the whole country. And what we do hope with the next administration, as what was mentioned, is really continuance of good practices in governance, especially for the infrastructure, social, health, and that of security for whole Davao and that of Mindanao. So those are some of the things that's happening here. And I'm pretty sure Lawrence here knows what we're talking about because he's been here also.
Well, yes, as I was saying, when I went to Davao, I'm actually a half Mindanaoan, having lived in Mindanao for over 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So I know very well the actually openness of Mindanao. And what I really appreciate in Mindanao is all the resourcefulness, not only of the people, but the land. The land is so rich. And when I drive, for example, from Cagayan de Oro to Davao, I'm thinking of Tuscany, Umbria. And when you look at it, it's very similar.
Wow,
the only thing that actually differs is now the implementation of the agriculture, how it is done in Italy and how it is done in the Philippines.
Agriculture.
Yes. So that should actually be sustained. I know agriculture is, let's say, a poor sector, if I can call it like that, because not many investments go into that sector. But there is ways to empower farmers, to make farmer cooperatives productive, even though that is like the Achilles heel from a financial point of view. And probably Mike can say a few words about that, because we see that a lot of money goes towards agriculture. Actually, not a lot, not enough, but the money that goes to agriculture is not used productively. So that is probably the right way to say it.
Yeah,
If that would be done, Mindanao would be number one in Asia, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to agriculture in a little while, but I want to ask Mr. Cole first. No, I asked Davao what are the innovations happening there. Maybe you can tell us what's happening in Cebu that you think could be or should be looked at by other local governments in the Philippines in terms of making it more business friendly.
Yes, I'd like to be honest and say that we're actually envious of what's happening in Davao and even in other regions like in Iloilo, no, with under the leadership of Mr.
Iloilo is also very exciting.
So, it's
also.
Yes, it's good that Davao has this like the MMDA. I think that's what's being done. Cebu also needs something like that, an MMDA for the whole region of Cebu. And I'd also like to also ask our political leaders to start. You've mentioned about Mindanao, but you don't always often hear the word Visayas. You know, people think of it as separate islands, but you know, like as the old saying goes, no man is an island. So it would be good if our political leaders and business leaders can look at the region as one whole, because each island, each province has their own specialty and has their own advantages. And I think the whole area should be looked at and developed as one whole region, so you can take advantage of each other.
Right. Well,
can I just say quickly?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, that MMDA might probably be not the right model, you know.
Okay.
To follow. Remember, MMDA is headed by a chairman, who is appointed
by the president,
trying to coordinate elected officials. How can an appointed official, you know, be able to manage elected officials? The elected officials
we're seeing that already, right?
That they have the mandate of the people. So I think we need to restructure MMDA and make it a truly separate region, like a province maybe, and get the head of MMDA elected. And then that should be the model that should be replicated in Davao and Cebu. And I might also want to add that the reason why Davao is so energetic as a city, as a place, is that it's a land of migrants.
Okay.
So hardy people, industrious people are the ones who make things happen in Davao. I also know Davao quite well because in my 6 years as president of UP, I was going to Davao frequently to our campus there, the University of Mindanao, UP Mindanao. So I got to know Davao also very well. And then the people there are truly industrious and have the drive. I don't know, maybe Dr. Monteverde can confirm this or deny it. I don't know, that's my observation.
I'm married to a Davaoenyo. A true Davaoenyo. Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Go.
Yeah, President Fred, I'd like to share the experience of Cebu during the pandemic, which is about how this Project Balik Buhay and the Tri-Cities, because it so happened that we have the OPAV is based in Cebu. So under the leadership of the OPAV, the governor and the Tri-Cities, we're able to, instead of setting up blockades for every city, they managed to get along and say, now, we shouldn't be looking at each other as different cities, because we're all linked to each other. So, but I would still think that an MMDA type, even if it's by a private person, not an elected government official, but a person with the right skills and with the right leadership, can still unite solve because mainly what MMDA is there to solve the traffic problem, right? So, if all the political leaders can support that, then see that should something work out for the good of everyone.
Well, I think what Davao has that Cebu doesn't have is also land. No, I mean you're operating in a much smaller space than Davao City, so that the challenges are quite unique to you.
Yeah, let me go back to what was mentioned regarding Metro Davao.
Yes.
The upcoming Metro Davao Development Authority, as we say, is patterned after MDDA, but it's benchmark and it's going to be a lot better. So at this very moment, we are getting all the regions together, talking about what to do, what not to do, and how to do it better than what happened to the Metro Manila. No, so that's where the learning process is, and that's where also we're benchmarking and doing it better. So for the implementation, I think we can still improve a lot on this, but really what was mentioned by Dr. Pascual regarding the head should be elected and not appointed, that's something to think about. Maybe not only for Manila, but for the rest, if there's going to be something similar that's going to come up with that, because we know how elected officials work also. So it's very difficult to have this integration between political parties and political heavyweights with their own turfs, no? So if you integrate it, there's going to be, a lot of uncertainties at times when it comes to decision making.
Yeah, all you need there is a mayor like in Makati who says he won't follow MMDA mandates, and that's it, right, Dr. Pascual?
Each one has its own traffic rules,
Yeah. So I want to turn your attention now to we talked about the priorities, but I want to be a little bit more specific on the economic front. You guys mentioned that there's a host of priorities to look at, and it's quite challenging for whoever will be the next president. We've heard energy, we've heard infrastructure, even education. I was wondering what economic sector you think deserves the most attention. I think Lawrence also mentioned agriculture. That's pretty interesting. You have about half of the population living in rural areas, and yet the agriculture sector is only contributing about 10% to GDP. But is that it? Is that the one that deserves the most attention, or is it energy? I think, as Jesper was suggesting, also with clean energy. What do you think that is? Maybe we can start with Mike. What sector deserves the next president's attention the most?
For me, I think there's no final answer for that, but definitely one item that requires attention would be still the power sector. There's a strong shift, as you know, in relation to clean energy, and there are several conglomerates that's spearheading the way towards that. So to the extent that the next government can shepherd a clear transition from the more traditional power sources types of projects to a cleaner one, it will allow us to be closer to what the rest of the world is already heading towards, number one. And number two, again, it will have a direct relationship to foreign direct investments, foreign direct investment decisions. A lot of the criteria that our foreign clients normally have would be power, cost of power, reliability of power. And relative to our Asian neighbors, we're not necessarily ahead of the curve.
No,
So
we're ahead in terms of price.
for sure. But again, it's because of the strategy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The level of subsidies being given
Yeah,
by government
that's true.
and the laws in place. So there's really several answers, to that question. But for brevity, maybe I'll stick to that first.
Yeah, so
the power sector.
well, Jasper, I think it's a good way to segment it because you mentioned how your chamber is working to attract clean energy investors to the Philippines. But is that the sector that deserves the most attention, or do you see something else, or maybe you can tackle those related questions?
Well, yeah, I would say if I am a little bit selfish and looking at the Nordic Chamber and those companies we help, I would certainly say the renewable energy sector is very high on our agenda. We have so many companies that have really good solutions on this, also on waste management, etc. But I would say we are doing actually one of our signature events by the 31st of May, the Nordic Innovation Forum, and we have focused on two areas which we think are the most critical for the Philippines, and that is energy and it is agriculture. So we will provide some innovative solutions, ideas during that event, and I think that is much needed to look at things in a different way as well. But going back to everything, I think financial, looking at having a strong financial leader, which Mr. Pascual and I think everybody has echoed as well. That is very important. I think Secretary Dominguez has done a great job, and also on sustainability at the recent COP, he was a very strong message from the Philippines in terms of renewable energy. And then it comes to what Lawrence is saying, implementation. That is the key to it, to really be successful and really show the world that the Philippines want to do these things and can do it. And I'm sure, it's possible.
Okay. Mr. Ko, you mentioned earlier the maritime industry, but is there something else that the next president should pay attention, or is that it?
Yes, I would like also to our government to also look at food security. So that's
food
related
security
to agriculture and aquaculture. We've seen like pork prices just shoot up. Now, the cost of lechon is still about 7,000 for one pool, but it's like half the size now of what it used to be. So I think that's one area that should be looked upon, or otherwise food is just going to be out of reach for the majority of Filipinos. Then the next sector would also be as I think was also already been mentioned, right? Like the digital. So I think in that space, a lot of employment can be generated not just by working from home, and because a lot of Filipinos are very creative and that can also go a long way in helping our economy and increasing the income of families.
Okay. Mr. Pascual, you mentioned education earlier, but I think you're going to have something in your mind.
I think our government is so structured that not one sector has to be given priority over another in that sense, because each one has its department secretary who's supposed to champion the sector he is assigned to. So the contest is in the allocation of the budget. Who gets the budget increase? That's where, the ability of the department head to make a case that agriculture needs a bigger budget. And I would tend to say the same thing, it's agriculture that should be given top priority because it's the second biggest employer, and most of the poor people are in the rural areas and agricultural areas, and I think we need to broaden the concept of agriculture. It's not just farmlands, as I already suggested earlier. It should cover also the marine resources, the aqua, and there's a lot of potential because raw materials come from agriculture. So if we properly harness the output of the farms, and technology is employed for value-added transformation of these farm outputs or marine outputs, then you will spawn a strong manufacturing sector and also spawn an export capability, because food is food, you know. Yeah. Food is a big challenge for many countries, and agriculture is the source of food. The main idea I'd like to propose, in fact, is that we should disabuse or restructure our agriculture department so that its concern will go beyond the farm gate, beyond the fisheries, and cover food as its responsibility. So the main output is not agricultural output, but food, to address food security and food sufficiency in the country, and also promote further processing of agricultural produce and marine resources produce, so we can already start a manufacturing sector in the country, and the products of these food manufacturing sectors could have a big potential for export. And for that purpose, I think our government, particularly the Senate, should quickly ratify our being part of RCEP. Okay. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. You know, we will. Many of our existing partner countries might go for a country in ASEAN, for example, that is part of RCEP because of the benefits that they'll be able to get from this RCEP affiliation of the country.
That's, of course, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Let's go to Davao. I mean, because Mindanao, as Dr. Monteverde said, you're the food basket of the country. But is that the industry that deserves the most attention now? Or is there something else?
From Mindanao and Davao, we would want that the next administration continue with the development of economic zones, whether it's going to be domestic for agri, and also for the foreign market when it comes to manufacturing. When you have a lot of economic zones, then the rest will be addressed, which means to say that really the government and that some of the private stakeholders will have to address power issues, connectivity, the logistics, shipping, marketing, and the rest. So what I'm really after is more economic zones for Mindanao, especially for the agri sector. And then, of course, we need to have digital transformation and a lot of innovations for us to be able to be more competitive in the global arena, whether it be in the way we do business, like what was mentioned by Jasper a while ago, or that in smart agriculture. So we need to be sustainable on our own as a country and not just a region.
Right. Lawrence, well, you started this conversation about agriculture. You're mentioning in Italy that there are ways to make that sector, more productive. You want to give us your thoughts?
Italy is actually the best example. I think Italy came out of the Second World War as a agricultural country, and that was end of the 50s. And through strong investments in agriculture, especially in agriculture and in the industrial sector, Italy became industrialized, and that happened only later. And it happened through various efforts, of course, concerted efforts from the politicians, from the sector associations, from everyone. And I think there is a way and there is a path, and Italy can really be the example for this also for the Philippines. But we were talking about implementation before, and I think the implementation lays a lot also in the LGUs, on LGU level. So I would like to beg the new administration to change one thing. Get the time of the elected officials from 3 years, so elections not every 3 years, to 5 years. At least these people can do something rather than being all the time on political campaigns.
Instead of campaigning, yeah.
That will be the biggest change that will probably solve 80% of all the issues that we're talking about, because we will actually have more productive time to discuss for implementation rather than discussing about who is better to be elected.
Right. How long do officials get elected for in Italy? The local government.
5 years. 5 years.
5 years. Okay, interesting. Dr. Pascual, you mentioned education earlier. You're
Yes.
the only one who brought it up. That seems pretty important. I mean, what should the next president look at in that sector? What's the most critical issues that you think?
Well, the critical issue is that the Philippines is the lowest ranking country when it comes to the reading ability of
this is the PISA
primary school, the PISA tests, and second from the lowest when it comes to proficiency in math and science. This has to be addressed, but it has to go farther back in before we get the kids to school. They must be properly prepared. And what do I mean? Nutrition should be addressed. 90% of the brain development occurs before the age of 5, before school age. And if a child has not been properly nourished, he will be stunted physically and mentally. And guess what happens after he gets to school? And the practices in school, I was in Bukidnon one time, and because my Rotary Club donated a girls' dormitory, and the mayor was telling me that he did a survey of high school students, and he found out that 40% are illiterate. High school students.
Wow.
And you know why? Because
No.
the practice is the teacher at each level is compelled, because of rules, to just pass a student whether or not he is deserving. So get the headache out of me, pass it on to the higher level.
Next teacher, wow.
And I think, I don't know, I have to check this. I think their incentive system is based on percentage of students who pass in the class of the teacher. So the teacher has the incentive to pass 100% of the students, regardless of the performance of the student. This has to be addressed. And of course, competence of teachers is the other thing, because our best graduates don't go into education because of the very bad reputation of teachers before, had among the lowest salaries in the hierarchy. But now, salaries have been increased. I think it's about time that bright students are encouraged to go into education. And with the application of technology, you don't need as many teachers as before, because certain lessons can be recorded and broadcast, to students. And you need fewer teachers who will do the discussions. So I believe that education is critical for the development of the Philippines as a country. If we cannot solve our education, we are in crisis. If we cannot solve the learning crisis in the Philippines, there is no hope for the country to progress, because where do we get the trained or the capable workforce who will do all those technology operations in factories invested in by foreign companies, or even companies set up to further process agricultural outputs into finished products. So very important, but it's not a problem that can be addressed with a snap of your finger. This requires patience. This requires years. That's why it has not been attended to by past administrations, because the horizon of a president is only 6 years, But here we're talking of initially 12 years for K to 12, plus 3, 4, or 5 more years in tertiary education. So it goes beyond the tenure of an elected official. So an elected official or an appointed cabinet secretary cannot show results right away. So there is no incentive to really solve the problem. I hope I'm wrong, but that's how I perceive it.
Right. Well, I think many people will agree with you. Yeah.
And there has to be a concerted effort to do this. My recommendation is that a multi-sectoral education council has to be set up to really grapple with the problems we have in education. This has been done before, but the need for this council who will do the roadmap for education in the Philippines has become critical. And we need to do it. The next president of the country must do it, even if the results will not happen during the time of the new president.
Right. Oh, Mr. Ko, you were saying earlier that part of the problems you experience is not having enough competent people to man companies. I mean, that's somehow related to education as well, right?
Yes. Because I think our DepEd ed needs to be more flexible or also progressive, because our curriculum is quite rigid, But with the K11, 12, and Tech Voc, there's hope for us that the private and the public sector can work together to produce the graduates that are needed by the industry.
Right. Mike, are you hearing similar problems about maybe low productivity? I guess that could be linked also to an education angle.
Definitely. So one aspect would be what President Fred described earlier would be the baseline, right? We're behind in terms of even literacy, math, English, but it was exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So I think we are one of the last countries to go back to regular face-to-face format, no? So that has likewise, it's an additional black eye as far as learning is concerned. So hopefully, if there is such a thing as a program that will jumpstart or help our children catch up, that would be helpful. And another aspect in relation to education, for clients that we've been helping to locate into the Philippines, again, another criteria would be the ability to source from a nearby university. So, for example, engineering companies that we've spoken to, they will ask, if I want to move to, let's say, Bacolod, but is there an engineering school that is nearby that can give us a steady supply, of engineers or learned graduates? What we've observed is that there are only selected centers of really good education around the country. Without naming any names, I think it comes naturally to us, right? Which specific locations that may be. So from a strategic perspective, one request would be if we can make it a bit more even, where specific regions or provinces won't have the lion's share of educational institutions that will really produce national level and global level types of graduates. I think that would also be a potential game changer for us.
Yes, Mr. President, go ahead.
Yeah, I've long proposed, that each region should have its regional university, which should be constituted by amalgamating the existing state universities and colleges within that region. How many regions do we have?
17.
I've lost track of the number.
Yeah, it grows.
But there are 100. How many? 17?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then there are 120 SUCs. And very few of the SUCs can really be considered to meet the minimum requirements of being recognized as a true university. So the idea is, if we are to develop by region, that's the thrust now, regional development as the basis for bringing up the country and minimize together, and minimize the inequalities by province or region. Each one should be given the means to do this. And the regional university will concentrate on the requirements of the region. So if that region produces, say, plantation crops like banana, pineapple, then that university should have specialists in plantation agriculture. Or in some other regions, the focus is on industrial design, then they will, like in Cebu, we're trying to develop Cebu as a regional center for IT and industrial design. The regional university there should be focused on producing the skilled manpower to do that. Region by region, we will have specialization that makes full use of the natural resources available in the region. So
interesting.
All regions will be productive and will be together will be contributing to the building up of the economic growth of the whole country.
Dr. Monteverde, in Davao, you have a lot of universities there, but are you seeing similar problems expressed here about finding, competent people to man your industries in Davao?
Yeah, it's the same all over. But actually, we have a mismatch also between the academe and that of the industry sectors that need the most. And another thing is our courses or most of our modules are not really fit to be, adaptable. They need to be more flexible on the present needs. Sometimes it's way out of the extraordinary, so that we need to be able to reform or make some amendments in the modules and in the courses that are being offered. So that's really something that we look forward. And of course, like what we notice in the Pinoy Big Brother, history has to be discussed again. And of course, language should be further strengthened. Like, for example, the way you speak English, Filipino, and the rest. It's going to take some time for these reforms, but I hope that the Department of Education will really look into this and work also with TESDA and that of the other government agencies, especially for those areas which needs, like for the IT sector, they need most, coming from the academe, so they need exposures to this. So there should be a lot of work for this sector from the government agencies.
By the way, I need to thank the Davao Chamber for organizing that introductory Bahasa course. I enrolled in it. I still have to review it, but it was a good introductory program. It was actually also free, offered by the Indonesian consulate there. What about Jasper and Lawrence? In terms of the labor productivity here, anything you'd like to see as regards to reforms in education that that you think would make the Philippines more competitive relative to others in the region? What's your experience? I mean, are you happy, or do you like to see some other skill set, or maybe a higher skill set of what kind? Maybe what's your sense? Jesper?
Yeah, I can go first. So I think in general we are quite happy with what we see. Majority of our members are though in Metro Manila. But I think also in Cebu and Davao we also see really good. But when you get further out in the province, it's starting to be a little bit more complicated. I would agree on that. I think more hands-on experience somehow, more internship, more relevant internships is a way forward. In the Nordic countries, it's all about teamwork. It's all about doing half-year or one-year internships. In the Philippines, most internships, they are 1 month or 3 months at max. And I don't think it's enough to really learn. Right. I think that if you're an intern and you take on 1 month internship, you're giving very, very simple tasks. You barely learn from it. I think there is a gap here that can be relatively easily solved. Also, making your thesis for companies, I think that is also a step forward. And then I would have to say, in recent talk with ADB, Asia Development Bank, and their new skills uprise, I can't remember the last, SUN, I think they call it, and they are looking into educating skills where you use your hands, like carpentry, plumber, all of these kind of skills. And I think there is a need for more formal education on these basic things because that is really the foundation for many things, to get the right quality done in all of these things, which these people, they are used in our construction industry. And there is a high need for more quality, especially if you want to do sustainable projects. If you want a unit, a condominium or something like that to be rated high sustainable, it has to be really high quality, how everything is made. And I hear from some of our members that are involved in this, that they are having a hard time finding people with the right kind of skills when it comes to higher quality levels.
Right. Lawrence?
I think maybe Lawrence has more to add.
You normally say you learn as much as your teacher can teach you. So probably if I was, let's say, to rule over this, I would eliminate all of them. So have a level playing field, and then triple or quadruple the salaries of all the teaching staff, and then employ the best. And I think then the level can rise, because when talking to many, especially in the provinces, they say we cannot afford to take someone, let's say, with 10 years experience in the US or in that who has worked abroad. We cannot get them to teach in our university because they're too expensive. So they prefer working abroad, or they prefer doing.
They go to Italy.
Go to Italy, for example. And I think that is a key factor. And it is very good that we are talking about education, because the Italian Chamber is supporting a project, which is an academy with exactly what Jesper said, an academy which brings together academe with the private sector, where private companies then can work together with the universities and take out the students and keep them for long internships, and also intervene in the academic program with their actual needs. So that's something that is happening right now, and I'm still writing the final presentation for it by end of this week. So that's
congratulations
for
that.
Working on, yes.
Yeah, let us know if there's room for a media partnership there. So we'd like to help you on that. It's,
absolutely, that can be done, and it should be done. It is planned to be done with organizations like Phoenix. It's planned to be done with organizations like MAP. They all need to be in there, because together we understand what the academic needs.
Right.
And so that will probably be, or could be, a small game changer in certain areas.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I really appreciate your views. I mean, I feel like we can keep on talking because there's, as Mr. Pascual said, a host of issues. The president can just focus on a single sector. He has to look at several key sectors. But maybe before we go, I can ask each of you to give a final comment or a message. Maybe we can start with the sole lady in our group today, Dr. Monteverde. Maybe you can give us your final message from the Davao Chamber.
Yeah, in behalf of the Davao City Chamber of Commerce, we would like to thank, of course, Manila Times for giving us this opportunity to voice out our concerns and hopes and dreams for the next administration. We wish the new administration that they will be able to continue what the reforms and the policies that were of good use for the nation will be continued, and of course focus more on infrastructure, social, health issues, the academe, agriculture. There's a lot that needs to be addressed even at this time, so that we need to be more competitive as a nation and, of course, be resilient, especially in the midst of the pandemic, and still work out together for the good of the nation. So we wish the next administration all the best, and we do hope that they will have the good people with them also.
Yes, I hope so. Next on my screen is Lawrence from the Italian Chamber. Your final message, sir?
My final message. Well, I think this could be an episode here because we have so many things to look at. We can do this by sector.
I believe so, yes.
It is very important that we meet regularly to discuss what is actually happening, what can be improved, and especially how it can be improved, because at least that keeps us up to date with things and with a feeling over the economy and over business. So that's why we are here for. But I agree that agriculture is actually a key point in the final growth, digitalization and agriculture. Agriculture especially because from there everything starts, right? From food and added value. And Italy, for example, has brought the GIs, which is the geographical indication protection, which basically has spearheaded tourism, agri-tourism all over the country. In fact, we are talking to IPOFIL here in the Philippines to help them to push this through. So the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, because for example, when I grow onions in Valencia, for example, in Mindanao, and so this specific onion in Valencia could have certain characteristics, a certain taste that is unique to that area. And if I protect it, so geographically protect it, first of all, this can then be sold for an added value around the country and even for export. At the same time, the area of Valencia can start doing agri-tourism. So people will go there and have and taste the plates cooked with this specific onion. Same like it's happening in Italy, for example, for wines or for cheeses or for cold cuts, we have this geographical protection. And we see how many people flock to Italy from all around the world just to do the wine tour, just to go to Tuscany and just to
That's a good point.
Visit these places. This can be replicated in the Philippines. And this can also then bring new investments in the agricultural sector. Tourism will flow towards the farms, and everyone will benefit. So that is my last message. Let's look at geographical indication protection because it will be absolutely beneficial for all the country.
Thank you. Mr. Kenneth Cole from the Cebu Chamber.
Yes, I'd like to ride on what Mr. Lawrence has said about agri-tourism. Because like in Cebu, we've seen how the pandemic devastated that sector, and it's something that we would like to be brought back. And it doesn't just involve about the development of the area, or it's also about opening up our borders. So and I hope the other countries will also start allowing their tourists to come out, because it's been 2 years and we've already, most of us are vaccinated, and we shouldn't be so afraid anymore of the virus, because there are people are not dying dramatically over it. So and aside from agri-tourism, I'd also like to the next administration to also look at the development on a wider perspective and consider the whole ecosystem, because one part cannot exist without support industries or service industries, and also that's also linked also to our education, and also it also goes back to manufacturing. So having the right skill set, and as mentioned earlier, because we have a hard time finding people, even just the artisans, to fit out a condo properly. So it's a long process, but I think it's good that we have this platform. I'd like to thank Manila Times for giving this, and I hope we can use this platform for our leaders to hear out from the private and from our foreign investors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ko. Jasper Svenningsson from the Nordic Chamber.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dante. Thank you so much to Manila Times for this. I think, replicating this, continuing something like this, but also replicating it, involving governmental, involving the new administration, having, all of us here, we have so many great ideas, I think. Sharing our ideas, having the new administration to listen to that, I think that will be key for a success. So continue from Manila Times, continue something like this. I highly urge you to do that. I would just go back to what I said in the start: education and sustainability. I think those are the two key things. I think we talked a lot about education, and as mentioned by some of the speakers here today, nutrition is really important. There's even a law in Denmark and in the Nordics in general, that nutrition is part of it. It's part of education. You will not reach your potential if you are not having the right nutrition. So in the end of the day, it's about the Philippines becoming more self-reliant on agriculture, on foods in general, and ensuring that everybody can get some vegetables, can get meat, can get milk, different kind of things that are actually essential for when you grow up, for your brain to develop. And then improving the education sector in general. It is, I would say, very important also, if we look with foreign investor eyes on it, that the schools are opening up face-to-face. A hybrid version is scientifically proven around the world. It's not working. It will not bring us back to where we need to be here in the Philippines if we continue down that line, I think. So that is essential, I think. And then not just the Nordic countries, but the world in general, we need more sustainability. The Philippines is one of the hardest hit countries in the world in terms of climate change, and we need to do our part here in the Philippines to combat that with renewable energy solutions and a lot of other things, including more females. I'm happy to see our female representative from Davao here today, but more female leaders in general is important. I'm not talking about presidential candidates, just to be clear on that. not necessarily. All right, that would be my recommendation. Really high focus on the longer term matters, education and sustainability.
Thank you. As you know, we appointed a woman to be the president of the Manila Times, so she's here as well. Mike from Phoenix, your final message?
So first of all, again, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to share our ideas and to coordinate with all of the other business organization and chamber heads. So I really think that at the end of the day, what we want to happen is to institute positive change for the nation. And we all want to be as competitive as the rest of the first world countries that we regularly interact with. So for us, continuity of programs that have worked is key. Just because there's new administration doesn't mean that we have to start from scratch. We know which things, which programs, and which initiatives have worked. Let's continue to roll them out. And we'd also like to reiterate our areas of focus, such as making sure that we continue our economic recovery and growth, as well as job generation for all. And then consistent with our discussions, education definitely is key for that growth, which would have a multiplier effect and positive effect on the other subsectors of the economy. And then since we are emerging from this from this healthcare issue, definitely we'd also like to see healthcare facilities and capabilities improved. Hopefully we learned from this experience the past 2.5 years. And lastly, being resilient against different types of calamities, be it economic or health calamities. So for us, cooperation is definitely key. Similar to what we just did this morning, people want to help. Excellent ideas are with us, so it's a matter of executing on them. And cooperation, government and private sector is key. And lastly, it's not just us Filipinos. No? We do have a lot of foreign friends that are willing to help and likewise to give excellent ideas and suggestions. So again, with that, thank you very much and have a nice day.
Okay, finally, but certainly not the least, Mr. Fred Pascual from the MAP. Sir? Sir, you're on mute.
Thank you to the Manila Times for creating this opportunity of bringing together people from different regional locations. You know, this seldom happens. You know that we have people from Europe, but different countries, from Davao, from Cebu, and of course us here in Manila. And it's very clear that although we are coming from different places, there seems to be some convergence of ideas on how to look at situations and the problems in that situation and how to approach the problems. The main point one point I'd like to emphasize is that although the tenure of elected officials are finite, they should not be expending this firefighting from one fire to another, doing short-term things, but always, address the immediate problems brought about by the pandemic, like in energy. There are immediate problems in education, in health. They require immediate attention, but our officials should not lose sight of the long term. And I'm glad the country is already beginning to think long-term development with the Ambition 2040 that was adopted by the current administration from the previous administration. And there is, as I mentioned earlier, the Pagtanaw 2046, a longer roadmap, longer perspective that brings in science, technology, and innovation to bear on the problems of the country and to be the basis for its development, particularly in harnessing its natural resources, not just natural resources on land, but also natural resources under the water. The challenge also is to address where the problems where the poor people are, and that's in the rural area. So agriculture is key to that. Regional development is key. Decentralizing the challenge of development should be the approach. No longer relying on Imperial Manila to provide all the answers. With the ruling of the Supreme Court in favor of the Mandanas case, there will be a lot more resources available in the local governments across the country. But these local governments need guidance. And I hope not only government technocrats will provide the guidance, but also people from the private sector like us. I think communication is key. Manila Times is doing its part. I hope the learnings and the ideas shared today could be disseminated outside this forum, and that could be the basis for impelling the development of the whole country together, not just Metro Manila, not just the big cities, but all over the country. We should see the blooming of development. Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank you everyone for participating in today's forum. We've heard a lot. I think a lot of food for thought, and I think as Pascual said, there's an emerging consensus that certain policies deserve to be carried over, but there's still a lot of things for the next government to tackle. I think Lawrence gave us a challenge to see how we can do this on a more regular basis. But as Jasper said, I think we need to improve on this and maybe invite some people, perhaps from the next government, to also participate. We shall endeavor to find some who will actually listen. So, but if we fail in that, we'll still look forward to maybe regular discussions with you. I think you guys, as you all said, bring about very important factors that need to be part of the national discourse. Thank you once again, and good luck to all of us in the Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much.
Salamat.
Bye.